Alright, so you guys want to know how the Sapphire Radeon Pulse RX 5700 8GB OC card performs, right? I mean, so do I, right? No, I'm just kidding. I've already done all the benchmarks, all the gameplay and all that good stuff, and that's coming right up now. Well, I know you want to see it, but just before we move on, make sure to click like and subscribe. That way I can keep bringing you guys the latest and the greatest on video cards, motherboards, CPUs, showing you guys how to install them, playing the latest games, and all that good stuff. Today we're going to be doing a review overview of the Sapphire Radeon Pulse RX 5700 8GB OC with the backplate. Alright, so we're just going to be going over some of the benchmarks, some gaming, and then, just talk about the card itself. Alright, to start off things, 3D Mark, Firestrike 1.1. So you can see here we reached 20,214, and that's the overall score. Of course, you can see a little bit more here as well. And that was at 65 degrees. That's the hottest the card got. And then you can see down here, it actually performed 94% better than all other results. And the maximum power consumed there was 297 watts, while the average power consumed was 246 watts. That's not bad at all for that kind of performance. So let's move on to TimeSpy. Alright, so in TimeSpy you can see here we received 8,116 on the overall score with a maximum temperature of 66 degrees. Now it was a little bit lower here. It performed 76% better than all other cards, so not as great as that 96%, but still not bad at all. Now, the max power consumed there was 327 watts, while the average was 234 watts. Alright, so now on to the gaming benchmarks. Leave the synthetic benchmarks aside. We're going to start off with Metro Exodus. Now, Metro Exodus, aside from being a benchmark that will stress your card to the very limits, is a very fun game, every single one of them. Now, Exodus is the latest one. So here we can see in Exodus, it did actually stress the card out a lot. We can see here at 1920 by 1080, we were able to get an average FPS of 61.88. Now, on average, it consumed 275 watts, which is not bad, and then at 68 degrees is the hottest. Now 2560 by 1440, that it struggled a little bit at 50.24 frames per second. And then unfortunately at 3840 by 2160, that it was 29.99 frames per second, not playable at all. So then, keeping true with what AMD has been coming out with before, the 1080p worked incredibly well. Now this card is aiming at the 2K. That may not have been the best game to show off the performance, so we're going to go off to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Then also to mention, every single game was played at Ultra, of course, unless I state otherwise, but everything was at Ultra or the highest settings at a resolution of 1920 by 1080, 2560 by 1440, and 3040 by 2160. Alright, and that's again going to be for all of the games, so let's get back into it. So we can see here on Shadow of the Tomb Raider, at 1080p we got a frame rate of 103 frames per second, which is awesome, with an average wattage consumed of 270 watts. At 2560 by 1440, we got an incredibly playable 69 frames per second, then with an average power consumption of 264 watts at 74 degrees, a little bit on the higher side, but still not bad. And then at 4K, unfortunately, was 35 frames per second. Not the greatest, but this card again is meant more for 2K gaming, so we hit it right there. Moving on to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, we can see here at 1080p, on average 65 frames per second, which is great, with an average power consumption of 288 watts. Then at 2K, we kind of struggled a little tiny bit at 50 frames per second at 287 watts on average at 67 degrees, so that's not bad at all. And well, unfortunately at 4K, it struggled again at 32 frames per second. Now moving over to Far Cry 5, we can see at 1080p, we got an awesome 120 frames per second with 292 watts on average used at 65 degrees. So at 2K, we were able to receive 89 frames per second. So still incredibly payable at only 68 degrees and only consuming 295 watts on average. At 4K, kind of struggled again a little bit at 47 frames per second. And then on Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands, we can see at 1080p, we reach 64.57 frames per second at 64 degrees, consuming on average 272 watts. Then at 2K, we were able to get 52.01 frames per second. So close to playable, you know, a little tiny bit stuttery, but not horrible, but still not the magic 60 frames per second. Now here, we hit 66 degrees and on average 274 watts. At 4K, unfortunately, we choked up again at 32.63 frames per second. Now, some of those are great, some of those not so great. Now, one of the awesome things that Sapphire did for this card, and actually it turns out that it works on older cards as well. I don't know the specifics on that one just yet, but I'll go ahead and put it down in the comments below just in case you guys are interested. But the trick software, so we've all known it to be, you know, just for overclocking, for LED lights, and for fan curves, but this one does a little bit more. Now, I received an early developer's copy of it, so there might be a few tiny issues, but all I was focusing on this side was Tricks Boost. That is new. So the idea behind this one is you're at 2560 by 1440, right? And you have all the eye candy at ultra, and you might be getting what, 55 frames per second, 50 frames per second, and you know you can do better. You know you can do a lot better, but you don't want to lower that resolution. You don't want to go down to 1920 by 1080. You don't want to lower that eye candy from ultra to high, which, by the way, usually it's not the greatest idea to play at ultra, maybe high, maybe medium. You know, while you do get beautiful looking games, you're actually going to take a huge performance, of course, depending on your resolution and all that other good stuff. But aside from that, so if you want to stay at ultra, if you want to stay at 2K, Tricks Boost has a little bit of a resolution for you guys. So they actually let you, in this software, which I haven't seen in other pieces of software, set custom profiles, or custom resolutions, I should say. So for example, 2240 by 1260. I know it sounds a bit odd, but you don't notice it in the game, and if you do, you have a magnifying lens up to your screen and you're seeing pixels and it looks horrible anyway, so it doesn't matter. But aside from that, you don't notice much of a difference, especially while you're playing, but you don't see any kind of glaring issues there. It looks, if not 99% perfect, maybe 98. So then it still looks like you're at full 2K, but when you go into the game, you actually set that resolution of 2240 by 1260 instead of 2560 by 1440. And then you're playing and it looks beautiful. So that's definitely one thing for you guys to check out. And that goes along with using the Radeon image sharpening. Then you can set it for 1080p, you could set it for 2K, and you can set it for 4K. So those are some options there. It's pretty slick the way that works. Now mind you, since this is the early developer's copy, I didn't play with the other settings. I focused mainly on the Tricks Boost, which is pretty awesome. So then going back to Tricks, like I said, you can squeeze out a little bit extra performance. So I went back and benchmarked those games again. So let's see what I got. So here you can see on Metro Exodus, we originally got an FPS of 50.24, and then with a 10.31% decrease in the resolution, and then dropping down to 2240 by 1260, we were able to get a 10.31% improvement in the score up to 55.7 frames per second. I know it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you're trying to inch closer and closer to 60 and you're at 50, that's a ton. You're gonna see that. All right, so then on Shadow of the Tomb Raider, since we were incredibly playable at 2K, I went ahead and did it for 4K. So the original was 35 frames per second. So then I bumped up the resolution, or brought down the resolution, and I was able to get it to 44 frames per second, a 22.78% improvement. I didn't get to 60, but if you keep dropping it, you can get there. But the problem is, when you drop it to so much, you might as well lower the resolution completely, because then you're going to start noticing, typically under that 88%, maybe under that 80%, you might start noticing a difference there. So then on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, originally we got 50 frames per second. After bumping down that resolution, we were able to get 54 frames per second, a 7.67% increase in performance. That's, again, without overclocking, potentially damaging your video card. So that's pretty awesome. Now, coming to Far Cry 5, we had an average frames per second of 47. Now, on Far Cry 5, you saw we were able to get 1080p and 2K perfectly fine. 4K kind of suffered a little bit. We originally got 47 frames per second. Now, bumping it down a little tiny bit to 3376 by 1899, we were able to get 58 frames per second. 2 frames shy of being the magical 60 frames per second. That is pretty awesome. And then on top of that, the temperature actually went down 1 degree because at that point, you're not stressing the card as much. So that's pretty awesome. And then finally, coming down to Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands, we can see that originally we got 52.01 frames per second. And then decreasing that 2K resolution, we were able to get 53.87 frames per second. A 3.51% improvement. Definitely not the greatest, but mind you, I'm sure that it's not going to be 100% perfect. And then mind you, since this is a developer's copy and it's working as good as it is right now, I'm sure it's going to get a ton better by the time you guys get to it. All right, so aside from benchmarks and all that good stuff, we do have some gameplay as well. I'm going to go ahead and link it up above in there. So we have Fortnite, we have Grand Theft Auto 5, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and PUBG. So check that one out if you can. All right, so now that we're done with all the benchmarks and all the games and all that other good stuff, getting back to the card. The card is a very nice looking card with the dual bias switch over there, then the 8-pin and the 6-pin PCIe. Yes, you have to plug in both. The nice metal backplate, that of course is going to help cooling the card down. And then the card being, you can see right over here, a little bit wider than all the other cards, again, to keep it nice and cool. This is the Pulse, so it does have a little LED here. The Sapphire logo is LED lit, but it's always lit, it's always red. Now mind you, if you don't care about the looks of the card and you don't care about the, being able to change the LED lighting, this is going to be an awesome card. It's still nice looking. The cooling is great, but of course it's not clocked as high as the XT card. So you can check everything down below. I have a full list of my system specs down below so you guys can compare with your own. And let me know what you guys think down below. I think it's an awesome card with an awesome price tag. The price actually just lowered right before it went live, so making it that much better. Alright guys, again, let me know what you think down in the comments down below. I'd love to know what you guys think. And as always, like and subscribe. It helps me to bring you guys bigger and better. Alright guys, yeah. See you guys.